It was early morning, and the sunlight poured softly through the tall windows of the community center. Dust particles floated lazily in the air, catching the light in tiny golden specks. The hall was quiet, empty except for a few early risers and a woman named Lena, who moved slowly but carefully across the room. She carried a small cloth in her hands, gently wiping the polished wooden floors and tables. Her movements were calm, steady, and almost unnoticed, like a quiet rhythm that matched the peaceful morning. Lena was a simple woman. She wore a plain dress that had seen better days, and her hair was tied back neatly in a loose bun. She didn't speak much, and most people didn't know much about her. She had worked at the community center for many years, cleaning, arranging chairs, and making sure everything was ready for the day's activities. She never complained, never drew attention to herself, and most of the time, she went completely unnoticed by those around her. People often assumed she was ordinary in every way, and some even treated her as if she was invisible. Staff members would walk past her without saying hello. Visitors would glance at her and move on, thinking she had nothing important to contribute. Even the children who came for classes would sometimes whisper and giggle, not understanding why someone like Lena didn't talk much or play along. But Lena had long ago stopped caring what others thought. She focused only on her work, on doing it well, and on the small moments that brought her peace. One of those moments was always the piano. At the far end of the hall, tucked in a quiet corner, sat an old upright piano. Its wood was polished but scratched in places, and the keys were slightly yellowed with age. Most people barely noticed it, except for those who played music or loved it. But Lena often paused while cleaning near it, her eyes lingering on the instrument. She didn't touch it openly. She didn't play for anyone. Yet there was a gentle warmth in her gaze whenever she looked at the piano, as if it held a secret part of her life that no one else knew. That morning, as Lena finished wiping the last table near the piano, she stepped back and rested her hands on her hips. She took a slow, deep breath and glanced around. The hall was empty except for the faint echo of her own movements. She knelt slightly and ran her fingers lightly over the top of the piano, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, but it filled her with a quiet sense of comfort. Soon the first few people arrived. The community center was hosting a music event that day, and performers were supposed to gather early for practice. Lena watched them silently from a distance. There were young musicians carrying instruments, old instructors checking their notes, and volunteers setting up chairs for the audience. Everyone seemed busy, focused, and slightly stressed. In contrast, Lena moved calmly among them, making sure the floors were clean, the chairs were aligned, and the tables were dust-free. Some of the staff noticed her but barely paid attention. A few whispered among themselves. "She probably doesn't even know anything about music," one said, smirking. Another laughed softly. "Imagine if she tried to play the piano today. We'd have to stop the show." They giggled quietly, thinking it was a joke. Lena heard nothing. She never reacted to whispers or jokes about her. She had learned long ago that the world would always have opinions, but they didn't define her. Yet, inside, there was a small part of her that remembered music more vividly than anything else. Years ago, as a young girl, she had spent hours at the piano, learning, practicing, and dreaming. Music had been her secret friend, her escape, and her joy. Life, however, had its way of changing everything. Family responsibilities, financial struggles, and the practical demands of adulthood had pulled her away from the piano. She hadn't played openly in years. Not for anyone. Not even for herself. Most days, as she stood near the piano, Lena's fingers hovered over the keys, not touching, just remembering the feeling. She could almost hear the soft notes in her mind, the way they flowed like water from her fingertips. The memory made her heart warm but also heavy. Music had been a part of her soul, and yet it had been tucked away, hidden from the world. She shook her head gently and returned to her cleaning, telling herself that some things were best kept private. The hall slowly filled with more people. The organizers began moving about, checking schedules, adjusting lights, and discussing the event program. Lena continued her work quietly. No one asked her for advice, and no one sought her opinion. She had become part of the background, almost like a shadow moving among the bright lights and busy people, but fate has a way of noticing the quiet ones. It often chooses the moment when no one expects it, and sometimes it rewards patience and hidden talent in ways that surprise everyone. As the morning progressed, the room grew busier. Young musicians practiced their scales, voices sang softly in corners, and instruments were tuned. Lena finished sweeping the floor near the stage area and moved toward the piano once more. Her movements were slow, careful, deliberate. She ran her fingers along the side of the keys as if greeting an old friend. She could feel the echoes of her past, the countless hours she had spent learning the subtle nuances of sound, rhythm, and emotion. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a mixture of longing, joy, and anticipation. For a brief moment, Lena allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to play again. To sit at the piano and let the music flow freely, to feel the world fall silent around her, to express emotions that words could never capture. She quickly dismissed the thought. After all, she had no place on the stage, no reason to perform, and no one expecting her to do anything other than her work. Still, the piano seemed to call to her. Its quiet presence in the corner, its slightly worn keys, the way the morning sunlight touched it, all of it seemed to whisper that perhaps one day there would be a moment meant just for her. A moment when the world would have to pay attention, whether it wanted to or not. At that moment, Lena's hands rested gently on the keys, her fingertips barely brushing them. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the memory of music as though it were alive. It wasn't loud or showy, just a quiet hum that reminded her of who she was and of the talent that had always existed inside her. Waiting patiently. Around her, the world continued at its usual pace. People laughed, talked, and moved hurriedly. No one looked her way. They underestimated her, just as they always had. But Lena didn't mind. She had learned to value her own quiet strength and her own passions. Even when others did and single quotes did. As the morning sunlight grew warmer, she straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped back from the piano. She continued her work, adjusting chairs, wiping tables, and moving among the bustling organizers. And yet, deep inside, she carried a secret. The music was still there, alive, waiting for the right moment. That day, no one would have guessed that this quiet, unassuming woman, the one who seemed to belong only in the background, was about to take a step that would change how everyone saw her. No one would have believed that her hidden talent, her years of careful practice, and her love for the piano would soon shine so brightly that the room itself would fall silent. For now, she remained unnoticed. The simple woman, the one everyone overlooked, moved quietly through the morning, unaware that fate was already preparing her for a moment she had longed for but never dared to imagine. The day continued to unfold in the community center, filled with a mix of activity and quiet anticipation. Lena had finished most of her chores, but her eyes kept drifting toward the old piano in the corner. She had always loved that piano, not for anyone else, but for herself. It was a part of her that no one had ever noticed or acknowledged. A secret world of music she carried silently in her heart. As she moved toward the storage closet to put away some cleaning supplies. The new event organizer, Mr. Halle, walked into the hall. He was a tall man with a brisk manner, wearing a sharp suit that made him look both serious and slightly intimidating. He had come to oversee the preparations for the day's musical event and to make sure everything ran smoothly. Mr. Hale's eyes scanned the room quickly, noting the performers, the volunteers, and the scattered instruments. Then he noticed Lena. She was kneeling by the piano, gently dusting its surface. There was a quiet focus in her movements, a calmness that seemed out of place in the busy, bustling hall. Curious, he walked closer. "You work here?" he asked, his tone neutral but observant. Lena looked up and nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I clean and help prepare the hall." Her voice was soft, almost shy, but it carried a quiet confidence that came from years of knowing her place and her role. Mr. Hale's eyes lingered on the piano. "Do you play?" he asked. The question was casual, but there was a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. Most people had overlooked her completely, but he noticed something. Perhaps it was the way her fingers hovered over the keys, the gentle way she treated the instrument as if it were fragile and precious. Lena hesitated. She hadn't played openly in years, and the thought of doing so in front of anyone made her nervous. But at the same time, a small spark of excitement flickered inside her. Music had always been her refuge, her way of expressing emotions that words could never capture. It had been hidden, locked away, but it had never truly disappeared. I used to, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Many years ago. Mr. Hale's eyebrows lifted slightly. Used to? What happened? She smiled faintly, a mixture of nostalgia and regret. Life happened, responsibilities, work, family. I haven't played in a long time. She didn't elaborate, because some parts of life are too personal to share. And she had learned that people often didn't understand. Mr. Hale studied her quietly for a moment. He could see the honesty in her eyes, the subtle pride in her posture, and the gentle longing in her gaze as it returned to the piano. He felt a sudden thought. Perhaps she could do more than just clean and watch. Perhaps she could bring something special to the event. You should try, he said finally, leaning slightly closer. Even if just for a moment? Lena blinked, surprised. She had not expected anyone to encourage her, let alone a man in charge of the event. I don't know if I could. It's been years. You won't know unless you try, he replied calmly. No one has to hear you. Just play if you want. Sometimes talent waits quietly for a moment like this. His words were simple, but they carried a warmth and encouragement that Lena hadn't felt in a long time. She glanced down at the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. Memories came rushing back, her first lesson as a child, the countless hours of practice, the way her fingers had once danced effortlessly over the piano. The piano had been her companion, her teacher, her escape, and now it was right here, calling to her once again. I don't know, she said softly, almost to herself. It's okay, Mr. Hale said kindly. There's no pressure. Just sit for a moment. Even if it's just a few notes. Trust me, you might surprise yourself. Lena felt her heart pound. She had almost forgotten the feeling of anticipation, the flutter of nerves before sitting at the piano. She took a deep breath and slowly moved toward it. The hall seemed suddenly larger, quieter, as if the world had paused for this small, fragile moment. She sat down on the bench, her hands hovering over the keys. For a long moment, she did nothing, just feeling the wood beneath her fingers, remembering the touch of each note, the sound that had once flowed effortlessly from her fingertips. She closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the memory. Mr. Hale waited quietly nearby, giving her space but watching attentively. He didn't interrupt, didn't pressure her, just allowed the moment to exist naturally. And slowly, as Lena's fingers touched the keys, a soft, tentative note sounded. It was gentle, almost hesitant, but perfect in its own way. Lena's eyes opened slightly, surprised at the clarity of the sound. It was as if the piano had recognized her touch, as if it had been waiting all these years for her to return. She played another note, then another, each one more confident than the last. Memories flooded her mind, lessons learned, songs practiced, emotions expressed through music. Her fingers moved more freely now, the hesitance fading. She wasn't performing for anyone, yet she felt a small thrill, a quiet joy that she had almost forgotten. The music seemed to wrap around her like a gentle embrace, filling the empty hall with a warmth and beauty that had been missing for so long. Mr. Hale watched, amazed. He had seen many performers, but there was something unique about Lena. It wasn't just the technical skill, although that was impressive. It was the emotion, the sincerity, the way each note carried a part of her story. He could feel it even from a distance, the quiet power of someone who had nurtured a talent in secret, and was now reconnecting with it after years of waiting. After a few minutes, Lena stopped and looked up, feeling a mix of exhilaration and vulnerability. She had not realized how much she had missed this, how much music had been a part of her identity. She expected nothing, no applause, no praise, no acknowledgement, but inside she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. See? Mr. Hale said softly, smiling. That wasn't so hard, was it? Lena shook her head, a small smile forming on her lips. No, it wasn't. You have a gift, he continued. A rare one. Don't let it stay hidden. Today's event. Maybe this is your moment. She looked at him, startled by the suggestion. Her life had been quiet, safe, predictable. She wasn't used to being noticed or told that her talent mattered. And yet, a small part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that perhaps this was the moment she had been waiting for. The morning moved on. Performers continued rehearsing, organizers busied themselves, and the hall grew louder with activity. Lena returned to her chores, but the piano now felt different. It was no longer just an object in the corner. It was a companion, a reminder that something she loved had survived. Patiently waiting for her return. As she worked, she thought about the possibilities. What if she did play today? What if she allowed herself to share the music she had hidden for so long? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. She had no experience performing in front of a crowd anymore. She didn't know if she could handle the pressure. And yet, deep down, she knew the music was part of her, and part of her wanted to let it flow again. Mr. Hale approached her once more later in the morning. If you change your mind, he said gently, the piano is ready. You don't have to plan anything. Just play when you feel it. Lena nodded. She didn't speak, but inside a quiet excitement stirred. The piano had called her once, and she had answered, even if only for a few notes. The rest of the day stretched ahead, full of possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine, and so, the simple woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and ignored, carried a secret thrill with her as she moved about the hall. The piano was waiting. Her moment might be coming sooner than she expected. And though no one around her yet knew it, something extraordinary was quietly preparing to unfold. For now she remained patient, silent, and unnoticed. But the spark had been lit. The quiet, humble woman with the hidden gift was about to discover that the world sometimes waits for the right moment to notice even those who seem invisible. The morning passed quickly, and soon the community center was bustling with activity. Musicians moved about, tuning instruments, practicing scales, and chatting quietly among themselves. Volunteers arranged chairs in neat rows for the audience, and the air was thick with the faint smell of polish and the hum of anticipation. Lena continued her tasks quietly, but she felt a strange mixture of nerves and excitement bubbling inside her. The piano, once a background presence, now seemed to call to her with an almost magnetic pull. As the event drew closer, the performers were gathering near the stage, ready for a rehearsal. There was a sudden commotion when one of the scheduled performers announced that they could not perform due to an unexpected emergency. The room filled with nervous whispers. The organizers looked stressed, flipping through schedules and trying to figure out who could fill the gap. A long silence hung over the hall as they considered the empty spot in the program. Then someone joked, almost in frustration, maybe Lena could play. After all, she's been near that piano all morning. The comment made a few people laugh softly, but most of the room barely paid attention. Lena heard it and her heart skipped a beat. She looked down, unsure of how to respond. She was not used to being the subject of attention, especially not for something as public as performing in front of a crowd. But Mr. Hale, who had been observing quietly from a distance, approached her with a calm and encouraging expression. "Would you like to try?" he asked gently. "Even if it's just for a few minutes?" Lena's first instinct was to refuse. She had not played in years in front of anyone, and the thought of a crowd made her stomach twist nervously. Her hands trembled slightly as she considered the offer. She had always loved music, always felt at home with the piano, but performing publicly? That was something else entirely. I don't know, she whispered, almost to herself. "You don't have to decide right now," Mr. Hale said. "But if you do, I promise no one will judge you. Just play as you feel it. That's all that matters." Lena looked at the old piano in the corner. Its keys glimmered under the soft morning light, and for the first time in years, she imagined herself sitting there, letting her fingers move freely across the keys. Memories flooded back her childhood lessons, the songs she had learned by heart, the countless hours she had spent perfecting every note. Her nerves began to mix with a strange sense of courage. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she nodded. I'll try, she said softly. The room seemed to shift as she moved toward the piano. Performers stopped talking, volunteers paused, and even the musicians tuning their instruments glanced up, curious. No one expected Lena to actually sit at the piano and play. She had always been the quiet one, the background figure who cleaned, organized, and watched. The idea that she might perform was almost impossible for them to imagine. As she sat down on the bench, Lena took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. The hall felt larger than it had moments before. The buzz of conversation faded, replaced by a quiet, expectant silence. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting herself remember the sensation of music flowing through her hands, through her mind, and into the air around her. Then, almost instinctively, her fingers touched the keys. The first note was soft, tentative, but it resonated clearly. A few people in the hall exchanged surprised glances. It wasn't just a simple sound. It carried a depth and warmth that no one had anticipated. Lena's eyes opened slightly, and she allowed herself to play another note, then another, each one more confident than the last. As she played, a transformation began to happen. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a quiet determination. Her fingers moved with precision, guided by years of memory and the emotions she had tucked away for so long. The music grew richer, more expressive. Each note seemed to tell a story of patience, of longing, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. The audience, which had been distracted moments before, now fell completely silent. Volunteers paused mid-task, musicians stopped tuning their instruments, and even the performers who had been rehearsing earlier leaned in to listen. Lena's playing was not loud or flashy, but it had a presence that demanded attention. There was honesty in her music, a truth that touched everyone who heard it. She didn't notice the room watching her. She didn't notice the gasps or the widening eyes. She only felt the music, felt the connection between her hands and the keys, felt the way the notes carried her emotions into the air. Each chord, each soft trill, each delicate pause was a part of her story. A story that no one had ever known until now. Minutes passed. Though it felt like only moments to Lena, the piece she played was simple in form but profound in feeling. It had been a song she had loved as a child, a melody that had brought her comfort during difficult times. Now, after years of silence, it had become something greater, a bridge between her hidden talent and the world that had underestimated her. As the last note lingered in the air, the hall remained completely still. No one moved. The silence was heavy, filled with awe and admiration. Then slowly a gentle clap echoed from the back of the room. It was followed by another, then another, until the hall was filled with a quiet but heartfelt applause. People stood, some smiling with genuine warmth, others wiping away small tears. They had not expected this. None of them had expected that the quiet, unassuming woman who had cleaned their hall daily could play with such grace, emotion, and skill. Lena lowered her hands from the keys, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and surprise. She had done it. She had shared a part of herself she had kept hidden for so long, and the response was more than she could have imagined. Her heart raced, but it was no longer out of fear. It was out of joy, of connection, of finally being seen for who she truly was. Mr. Halle approached her again, a proud smile on his face. "That was incredible," he said simply. "You didn't just play the piano. You told a story, and everyone heard it." Lena looked around, still feeling a little overwhelmed. People who had overlooked her for years now looked at her with respect, admiration, and even awe. Some volunteers whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. "I never would have guessed," one said softly. "She's amazing." For Lena, the moment was almost surreal. She had spent years believing that her music was only for herself, that it was a private treasure meant to be hidden. Yet here it was, filling a room, touching hearts, and leaving an impression that no one would forget. She realized in that moment that her gift was never meant to stay hidden forever. It had waited patiently, and now it had found its stage. The rest of the event continued, but Lena's performance became the quiet centerpiece of everyone's memory. People talked about it in hushed, reverent tones. The young musicians looked at her with new admiration. The volunteers treated her with newfound respect, and even the staff who had joked about her earlier seemed embarrassed at how wrong they had been. But Lena herself remained humble. She returned to her work quietly after the performance, wiping a few tables, adjusting chairs, and moving among the busy people. She didn't seek praise or attention. She simply felt a quiet satisfaction that no one could take away. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and allowed herself to shine even for just a few moments. As the day wore on, Lena caught glimpses of people smiling at her, whispering about the performance, and shaking their heads in admiration. She didn't know how long the memory of her music would last for them, but she knew it would stay with her forever. The piano had called her, and she had answered. The music had flowed again, stronger and more alive than ever, and she had proven to herself and to everyone around her that she was capable of more than they had ever imagined. And in that quiet, human moment, Lena realized something important. Talent isn't about being noticed from the start. It's about nurturing it, believing in it, and waiting patiently for the right moment. Some people will always underestimate you. Some will never believe in your abilities. But when the moment comes, and it always does, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, can rise and leave an impression that no one ever forgets. That day, the simple woman who had once been invisible had shown her strength, her skill, and her heart. She had turned a last-minute emergency into an unforgettable moment, not for fame, not for recognition, but simply because she allowed herself to be true to her talent. And from that day forward, no one in that hall would ever look at Lena the same way again. After Lena's performance, the hall was filled with an energy that was hard to describe. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but it had a quiet intensity that made people stop and look around. Volunteers paused in the middle of their tasks. Musicians lowered their instruments, and even the staff who had been rushing about earlier seemed frozen in place. Everyone was thinking the same thing. They had never expected this. The simple woman who had always been in the background had just given a performance. No one could forget. People who had underestimated her began to see her differently. A few of the volunteers who had joked about her earlier exchanged embarrassed glances, realizing they had been wrong. One of the young musicians whispered to another, "She's incredible. I never would have guessed." Even the more experienced performers were impressed. They had been trained to notice skill and technique, and Lena's playing had both in abundance. But it was more than that. It was emotion, expression, and a quiet strength that couldn't be taught. Lena herself didn't seek the attention. She returned to her duties quietly, wiping a few tables, adjusting chairs, and moving among the busy performers and volunteers. Yet inside she felt something different, something she hadn't felt in years. It was a mix of pride, relief, and a small but powerful sense of belonging. For so long she had been overlooked, treated as invisible, and assumed to be ordinary. But now, for the first time in her adult life, people were seeing her, not just her presence, but her talent, her heart, and her courage. As she moved through the room, Mr. Halle approached her again. "You have a gift," he said softly, but with genuine admiration in his eyes. "It's rare to see someone play with such honesty and emotion. You didn't just perform, you touched everyone in this hall." Lena felt her cheeks flush, not out of vanity, but from the overwhelming sense of validation. She had always loved music, always practiced quietly, always kept her talent hidden because she didn't expect anyone to notice. And yet, here it was, recognized and appreciated in a way she had never imagined. "You really shouldn't hide it anymore," Mr. Halle continued. "The community, the students, even the staff, they would all benefit from hearing you play. You have a way of connecting with people through music that is rare. Don't keep it to yourself." Lena smiled faintly, unsure of what to say. For so long she had believed that her music was only for her. She had nurtured it quietly, kept it in the background, and accepted that it might never be acknowledged. But now she realized that music, like any gift, was meant to be shared. Not for fame, not for recognition, but simply because it could make people feel something happiness, calm, hope, or even inspiration. As the event continued, small groups of people came over to Lena. They didn't just offer polite congratulations, they spoke with genuine warmth. "You're playing. It was beautiful," said one young volunteer. "I felt like I could actually hear the story behind the notes," added another. Even the performers, who had been slightly skeptical before now, looked at her with respect, asking about her past, her lessons, and the hours she had spent learning. Each interaction was new for Lena. She had spent so many years being invisible, overlooked, and underestimated that she wasn't used to receiving praise or attention. At first, she felt awkward, unsure how to respond. But slowly, a sense of confidence began to grow. She realized that people weren't just noticing her piano playing, they were noticing her. They were recognizing the dedication, patience, and love she had poured into her craft over the years. Later, as the hall began to quiet down and the event reached its final moments, Lena found herself standing near the piano again. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the smooth wood and the familiar resistance of the old instrument beneath her hands. Memories of her childhood, of long hours spent practicing, of the joy she had once felt while playing, all of it came rushing back. And now she realized it was more than just memory. It was proof that talent, patience, and persistence could not remain hidden forever. She glanced around the hall. People were tidying up, chatting quietly about the event, and leaving with smiles still on their faces. Some still whispered about her performance, shaking their heads in disbelief. It struck Lena how something she had always considered a private part of herself had created a ripple effect, affecting people she didn't even know, leaving a mark that would linger long after the event ended. HOA approached her once more, this time with an idea. "There's a music program starting next month," he said. "I think you should be involved. You could teach, perform, even mentor young students. They could learn a lot from you, not just technique, but passion, patience, and the love for music you clearly have." Lena was taken aback. The thought of teaching, performing regularly, and stepping into a more public role was daunting. She had always been shy, always preferred quiet observation to active participation. But at the same time, a sense of excitement stirred within her. She realized that this was an opportunity not just to share her music, but to connect with others, to inspire them, and to finally give her gift the attention it deserved. I would like that," she said softly, a small smile spreading across her face. "I think I could try." Over the next few weeks, Lena slowly began to step into this new world. She met with students, sharing stories of her early lessons and encouraging them to find their own voices through music. She played at small gatherings, watched young performers practice, and offered gentle guidance and support. And with each interaction, her confidence grew. She discovered that performing wasn't just about skill, it was about connection, about emotion, about sharing a part of yourself with others and watching it take root in their hearts. People who had once overlooked her began to see her in a new light. They respected her not only for her talent, but for her humility, patience, and quiet strength. She was no longer just the simple woman in the background. She was a musician, a mentor, and an inspiration. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and allowed herself to shine in a way that changed how everyone around her perceived her. Through it all, Lena remained humble. She never sought praise or recognition. She played because she loved music, because it was a part of her, and because she wanted to share the joy it brought. But the impact she had on those around her was undeniable. People would talk about her performances for years, telling stories of how the quiet, unassuming woman had stood at the piano and made the hall fall silent, not with grandeur or showmanship, but with honesty, heart, and pure talent. And perhaps most importantly, Lena herself had changed. She no longer believed that her gift needed to be hidden. She understood that being overlooked or underestimated didn't define her. What mattered was her own belief in herself and her willingness to embrace opportunities when they appeared. The piano had always been a part of her, waiting patiently. Now she had found her place, her voice, and her courage to let it shine. In the days that followed, the community center became a hub of quiet excitement. People spoke of her performance, students eagerly attended music classes, and Lena's presence was no longer invisible. She had shown that talent could wait quietly, that patience and perseverance were powerful, and that even the simplest, most overlooked individuals could create moments that left a lasting impression. And through it all, Lena returned to her piano often, sitting quietly and letting the music flow. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about joy, connection, and the fulfillment of sharing a piece of herself with the world. The music was no longer just a memory or a private treasure. It had become a living, breathing part of her life and of the lives of everyone she touched. In the end, Lena learned something simple but profound. Life doesn't always notice talent at first. People may underestimate you, ignore you, or assume you are ordinary. But if you nurture your gifts, stay patient, and trust in yourself, the right moment will come. And when it does, you can rise quietly with courage and grace and leave an unforgettable mark on the world. The quiet, humble woman who had once been invisible had become something more, a symbol of patience, talent, and quiet strength. And the music she played that day would be remembered, not for its notes alone, but for the heart, courage, and humanity that poured through each one. Days turned into weeks, and Lena's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The performance at the community center had become the talk of the town, and people who had once overlooked her now watched her with quiet admiration. But Lena herself remained grounded. She didn't let the attention change who she was. She still arrived early at the center, still cleaned, still helped organize chairs and tables. Yet now she moved with a subtle confidence, a knowledge that she had discovered something inside herself that could not be taken away. The music program Mr. Hale had suggested became her new routine. She met with students in small groups, helping them practice scales, teaching them about rhythm, and showing them how to express themselves through music. The students were eager to learn, and they listened to her carefully, not just because she was knowledgeable, but because they could feel her passion. Lena had a way of explaining music that made it come alive. She didn't just teach notes. She taught feeling, patience, and the joy of discovery. At first, Lena had been nervous. She had never taught before, and the idea of guiding others made her stomach flutter with uncertainty. But she quickly realized that teaching was just another way of sharing her music. It wasn't about standing in front of a large audience or performing perfectly. It was about helping others find their own voice, about being patient and encouraging, about passing on the gift she had been given. And as she taught, she discovered that she learned as much as she gave. The students' excitement, their mistakes, and their small victories reminded her of her own journey and made her appreciate the music even more. Word of her talent spread beyond the community center. People came from nearby towns to hear her play, to see the quiet woman who had transformed a simple melody into something unforgettable. Some were musicians themselves, curious about her technique and style. Others were simply listeners, eager to experience the honesty and emotion in her music. Lena never sought recognition, but she was slowly discovering that sharing her gift could touch people in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon, after a small performance in the hall, an elderly man approached her. He had been sitting quietly in the back, listening intently. "I have attended many concerts in my life," he said softly, "but I have never felt music like this. You don't just play the piano, you speak through it? Thank you for sharing this with us." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had spent years hiding her music, believing that it was a private part of her life, something that only mattered to her. And yet, here was a stranger, moved to tears by the same melodies she had played in silence for so long. She realized that music, when shared from the heart, had the power to connect people in ways words never could. Not all of the attention was easy to handle. Some people questioned why she had not performed sooner or why she had remained in the background for so long. There were whispers of surprise and disbelief, but Lena paid little mind. She knew that her journey was her own, and she had no regrets. The years of quiet preparation, patience, and hidden practice had shaped her into the musician she had become. And now, finally, she could embrace her gift fully. Her confidence grew with each passing day. She played at small events, at local schools, and occasionally at larger community gatherings. People began to look forward to her performances, not just for the technical skill she displayed, but for the heart and humanity that poured from each note. Lena had discovered something powerful. When you share your true self with the world, people respond not necessarily with grandeur or applause, but with quiet admiration, respect, and inspiration. One day, a group of young musicians approached her after a rehearsal. "We want to learn how you play like that," one said earnestly. "How do you make it feel so real?" Lena smiled, kneeling slightly so she was at eye level with them. "It's not about playing perfectly," she said gently. "It's about feeling the music, letting it speak for you, and being patient with yourself. Practice, yes, but also listen. Listen to your heart and let it guide your hands." The students nodded, absorbing every word. Lena realized that this was more than teaching. It was passing on a legacy, not just of notes and melodies, but of courage, patience, and self-belief. She thought back to her own years of quiet practice, when she had been underestimated and overlooked, and she understood that those experiences had shaped her into someone who could inspire others. As the months went by, Lena's life continued to transform in small, meaningful ways. People who had once dismissed her began to respect her presence. Students and volunteers treated her with warmth and appreciation, and her performances were remembered long after the last note faded. Yet she remained humble, never forgetting the years when she had been invisible, when her talent was hidden, and when the world had underestimated her. Her story became a quiet legend in the community. People spoke of the woman who had once been overlooked, who had waited patiently, and who had then risen to touch hearts with her music. She had become a symbol of perseverance and hidden talent, a reminder that even those who seem ordinary have the power to create extraordinary moments, despite all the attention. Lena's greatest joy remained simple. She loved to sit at her piano in the quiet moments, letting her fingers wander across the keys, listening to the music flow. She loved teaching, sharing, and inspiring, but most of all, she loved the connection she felt when her music touched someone's heart. That connection was her true reward, far beyond applause or recognition. One afternoon, as she closed the piano lid after a small recital, she paused and looked around the hall. The sunlight streamed through the windows, dust particles dancing in the warm light. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her gift had finally found its place. People no longer underestimated her. They didn't see just a quiet woman who cleaned the hall. They saw a musician, a teacher, a storyteller, and someone who had found her courage to share her talent. Lena understood now that life had a way of testing patience. She had been overlooked for years, underestimated and ignored. But she had nurtured her talent quietly, never letting go of her love for music. And when the right moment came, she had stepped forward, not with pride, but with humility, courage, and authenticity. That moment had changed her life forever. Even those who had once doubted her now looked at her with respect. Volunteers, students, performers, and visitors all saw her differently. They had witnessed the power of patience, talent, and hidden strength. They had learned that no one should be judged by appearances alone, and that even the quietest, simplest person might hold extraordinary gifts. Lena's life continued to be filled with music, connection, and small joys. She had discovered that being underestimated did not define her, and that hidden talent, when nurtured and shared, could leave a lasting impression on the world. She remained humble, kind, and patient, but she also knew her own worth and her own power. She had transformed from the invisible woman in the corner to a source of inspiration for many, and that transformation had changed not only her life, but the lives of everyone who had the privilege to hear her play. And so Lena's story came full circle. The simple woman, once overlooked and underestimated, had allowed herself to shine. She had embraced her gift, shared it with the world, and left an unforgettable mark. Her music was no longer a hidden treasure, it was a living, breathing part of her life, touching hearts, inspiring others, and proving that patience, courage, and belief in oneself can turn quiet moments into unforgettable memories. The community center would never forget her performance. The students would carry her lessons forward, and Lena herself would always remember the first time she sat at the piano and let the music speak for her. That moment had started as a small, quiet act, but it had grown into something extraordinary, a reminder that even the simplest among us can achieve greatness when we trust ourselves, nurture our talents, and are brave enough to share them with the world. And in the end, Lena realized that it wasn't about fame or recognition. It wasn't about applause or awards. It was about connecting, about inspiring, about showing that even the quietest, most overlooked person has a voice worth hearing, a gift worth sharing, and a heart capable of touching the lives of many through music. Patience and courage, Lena had rewritten her story, proving that anyone underestimated by the world could rise quietly and leave an unforgettable mark. She had transformed from a background figure to a symbol of hope, talent, and quiet strength. And as she sat at her piano, feeling the keys beneath her fingers, she smiled, knowing that the music and her spirit would continue to inspire for many years to come.